You think you're embarrassed?
No.
Get ready for me to be embarrassed.
Hi, I'm Grayson Black, and welcome to Campfire Bandy.
Howdy campers, and welcome back to the Fire Pit. You're listening to episode 2 of Campfire Bandy, a podcast where I put myself through the existential embarrassment of doing this intro not only in one take on camera, but also in front of our awaiting guests. No, but in all seriousness, this is a podcast where we invite you to pull off of the information superhighway and listen to real stories by real people. I'm very excited about our guest today, Brianna Millsaps. She is a very close friend of mine, and in fact, we are former partners who have managed to harbor a very good and close friendship. But she's also someone whose journey I admire very much because she's worked through a lot of hardship with the support of others, yet she's blazed her own path to be exactly where she is today. So, Brianna, how are you? I hope you enjoyed that.
Can we pause for a second?
No.
Can you edit this out?
Nope.
Please? I'm trying to collect myself after that intro.
What was it, funny or stupid?
Oh, it was great.
Oh, whatever.
Yeah.
Brianna, how are you?
Are you lying about not being able to edit this?
I can edit it, but I'm not going to.
I don't like you at all. I'm not ready for this.
Brianna, how are you?
I'm good, Grayson. How are you?
Forgot that you were an android. It's so good to have you on the pod. Who made you, Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos? You know who either of those people are?
Yes, I do.
All right, we'll move on from the... Listen, you're really putting me in the hot seat over here, okay? This is supposed to flow. I'm just kidding.
I'm sorry. I'm like really nervous and I don't know why.
You're doing great.
Well, we can restart like from the beginning.
You just want me to do that fucking intro again, and I'm not doing that, okay? So you
Okay,
just... Jesus Christ.
You know what? Just interview somebody else.
Who? All right.
Walker.
Okay. Let's move on from the how are you question, okay? So, for our campers, that's what I'm calling my podcast listeners from here forward.
Ooh.
For our campers that may not be familiar with you, how would you, Brianna Millsaps, describe yourself in 3 words or phrases?
3 words. I actually had to do something like this the other day in a reflection time. So 3 words here lately are probably restless, yearning, and adventurous.
Ooh, 3 good ones. So you gotta tell us about at least one of them.
The yearning is definitely a more constant feeling as far as all the places that I have yet to see that I'm aching for. So, and restlessness, that's still a very present adjective in my life.
Even after everything that you've done, being in CCC, kind of bearing the lead here, but I guess you're getting to see a lot of these places, and do you think it's making you even more restless?
Does Iowa and Indiana count as places?
They're not Tennessee, specifically not Athens, Tennessee, or Madisonville, Tennessee. So,
yes, I would say yes, I guess.
you're gonna have to loosen up. Take a shot of vodka or something.
I done had plenty of shots of vodka today, actually.
Okay, well, all right. So, this is a podcast about stories, or at least it's supposed to be one about stories and not underlying anxiety. So, where would you say that your story begins?
I would say, I feel like it, for me personally, probably started in 2019 when I started going to therapy. I feel like everything before that was kind of just existing.
So your story is one of feeling like you were, would you say living? Or how would you frame that, the beginning of your story?
Kind of like the quote that you hear, if you're not living on edge, then you're just taking up space. Definitely like that. I know that time wasn't really wasted because time is never wasted, but I just wasn't happy, I think. Oh my god. Can we cut?
Why? Listen, there's a lot of people that aren't happy.
Grayson, I can't do this.
Oh my goodness.
Do you see how red my face is? Maybe it's
Your
just the
face,
lights.
if it's not even red, you're you're losing it. No, I'm kidding.
I've been losing it, buddy.
Okay. So you feel like your story starts with counseling.
Yes,
Can you...
Shout out to Steve Brown.
Hell yeah. My instructor at UTK social work program and counselor, and also somebody who was very impactful in your life. So, counseling is where your story begins, but there was a lot that happened before that. What were some of the things that you're comfortable talking about from your childhood and your high school years that you explored in counseling that made you feel like you were actually living once you started that process?
Well, I suppose now I'm comfortable with talking about any of it. I'd say starting with childhood, my mother is narcissistic, so if you're watching this, Mom, surprise. So, I don't know how to talk about this.
What makes you say that she was narcissistic? What did you experience with her that's helped you to come to that conclusion?
Well, I discovered in therapy that she definitely has the narcissistic tendencies as far as like short phrase being wrapped up in her own little world, and I don't know, just thinking that anything she did wasn't her fault. Like she would always put her boyfriend at the time ahead of me, and so that became a very normal thing. So my father was incarcerated when my mother was pregnant with me, He's been in prison since 1997. He has life without the possibility of parole. And I think that my mom was a little not present as is, but I personally feel like that kind of sent her a little further into the deep end. And after I was born, I think I was around 1 or 2. Thankfully, she realized that she wasn't capable of taking care of me financially or mentally. And so she asked her sister, my aunt, to take care of me. And so thankfully, she took me in, and I lived with my aunt until I was 9, where um, it was a very idyllic childhood.
So let me jump in and ask you what you mean when you say thankfully, because you said that twice. You said thankfully she took that approach, or she realized that she couldn't take care of me, I think is what you said. What makes you say thankfully?
I'm thankful for it because I knew that had no one been there and been able to take me in, then my mother would not have been able to take care of me, and I feel like I would have been um, worse off than I already was when she still had me. So,
So you
I mean, essentially, I
looking
think that was kind of a saving grace.
sorry, the audio is coming through a little laggy.
Okay.
So I imagine as an adult you can look back and see that it probably was a positive. But could you tell that it was going to be better even as a kid, like living in those moments?
Well, considering I was just 2 or younger when I moved in with her, um, I mean, I grew up calling her mom and calling my uncle dad, and so that was pretty much the only thing I had, like the earliest memories that I had. Um, so I think I just thought that it was going to be like this all the time.
You mean you grew up calling your aunt mom?
Yes.
Yeah. And how long were you essentially raised by your aunt?
I lived with my aunt until I was 9 years old. And
And
then my mother went back to court and got custody of me again. And so then I moved back in with her.
what prompted that?
So I've been told apparently that um, my mom asked me if I wanted to live with her. And from what I can remember about it, is she was basically promising like all these good things and this cool stuff and basically everything you want to hear as a kid. And I had said yes, that I wanted to live with her. And I definitely don't think that a 9-year-old or 8-year-old should be making that kind of decision at all. Um, but the court did rule that she was responsible enough to take care of me again, and I guess they was just giving her another chance.
So, did you go into that thinking it was going to be a positive thing, even if it was naively thinking that?
Yes. Yes. I'm not sure how naive an 8-year-old can think, but I mean, they just kind of believe what they hear for the most part.
Yeah. Yeah, naively's probably not the best wording, almost innocently, you know? I mean, she's telling you these things. She's an adult who is your mom, and I'm sure you did know that she was your actual mom, your biological mom, I should say. So, you're going to believe her.
Yeah.
So, how did that go?
Can I say shit show?
You can say whatever you want.
um, I think it's hard to remember some parts, but quickly realized that it was not at all what I imagined it would be. And she had a boyfriend at the time, one that she had already been dating and was living with before I moved back in with her. And there was a lot of physical abuse in the house and drug use. So that was definitely something that I adapted to. Not that by any means is it normal. It was normal in the house. So it was definitely different.
Did you learn to navigate that? I mean, or I guess I should say, how did you navigate the physical abuse and the drug abuse that you hadn't been witnessing before at your with your aunt?
Even though I hadn't like experienced it or seen it before, I'd like just knew that this wasn't okay. And my mother's boyfriend would drink a lot, and I think that's what led to the physical abuse. And um, as far as navigating it, I don't know. I kind of just learned to hide or um, not make my presence known. Um, yeah,
Kind of like stay out of sight, out of mind almost, just so you didn't have to deal with it.
yeah.
And when you were younger with your aunt and when you were with your mom, did anybody try to keep you in touch with your dad, or what was that like, and who was the one trying to foster that relationship, if anyone?
So when I lived with my aunt, my dad would write pretty frequently, and he called the house. And I remember my other aunt, my father's sister, taking me to go visit him pretty regularly. As far as when I moved in with my mom, um, her boyfriend at the time would get jealous that my dad was writing to their house, and my mom um, always opened up the letter and read the letters. And so it was really sporadic as far as communicating with him.
Was she like regulating the ones that she gave you, or was she just trying to get like, did you feel like she was just trying to get in your business, or?
I think it was mostly just a jealousy thing, and she probably still wanted to feel connected to him, whether that was through me, which is how she made it seem.
Yeah. Do you think that she took him going to prison harder than she let on, just because of how she was brought up to handle emotions and stuff?
Um, I feel like that may be a possibility, but I know she wasn't very well off even before, but I definitely think that that contributed to her not really being present or knowing how to deal with emotions, whether that's within herself or others.
Gotcha. So you were living with her well into high school, correct?
Until I was about 17, and we moved around pretty frequently. I transferred schools a lot, and we had just moved to the county over when I was going to have to transfer high schools, and I didn't want to do that. I think I was in the middle of my sophomore year, and so I moved in with my best friend at the time, and so I lived with her during the weekdays and just visited with my mom on the weekends.
Gotcha. So from 8 to 18, you were living with your mom and her, whoever else she had in the house.
Yes.
Would you say that from 8 to 17, things got better or worse or pretty much the same?
Far worse. I think I definitely learned how to roll with the punches and just go with the flow type mentality. Um, her boyfriends were a constant changing cycle. So it was just something that I became used to, having a new male figure in the house. But when she started dating her ex now, that's when things really started to escalate, and there was multiple times where things reached a breaking point, but she would always stay with him, so nothing really ever changed.
So I guess all the boyfriends she was bringing in, none of them were super great. Definitely none of them seemed like they would be father figures.
Correct. None of them were father figures, that's for sure. There was one guy she started dating shortly after I moved back in with her when I was 8, after her and the guy that she was living with broke up, and we was actually living at a house without power at the time and didn't have any groceries, and she would go over to her boyfriend's house and leave me and her ex-boyfriend's daughter there to fend for ourselves.
So you were living at a house with no power with her boyfriend's daughter as well, and you all were left there alone to just figure it out.
Yes, there was a few times, and I'm thankful for the neighbors that we had, because um, the girl that was living with me, I don't really want to mention any names, but if she
Yeah.
listens to this, she'll know. We would go over to the neighbor's house and ask for food because we didn't have any food in the house, and I mean, like, heating up water to bathe in on the cast iron stove, using candles for lights. It was very pioneer days.
Yeah. And, I mean, do you know where your mom was when you all were doing that?
Sometimes she was present, but once she got her new boyfriend, she would go over there often, which of course he had power, so she was living in a life of luxury.
Wow. So is I was going to ask you what the worst thing you experienced during that time was, because it sounds like you had very unstable home life, men coming in and out, changing homes a lot, but also not knowing whether you were going to be able to rely on basic shelter needs, but also, you said physical abuse going on. So I mean, can you think of like the worst thing you experienced during that time period?
From just that one time living in the house, or the whole time I was living with my mom?
Um, I was thinking more of like the whole time you were living with your mom.
Um, I would say the most traumatic experience I had, the one that always sticks out when I think about it, is I think it was maybe the summer before I went into junior year. Um, I had went away to FFA camp, and I remember coming back to the house that we was living in, which of course was not the same house, and wasn't even the same boyfriend that she had. Um, and I remember coming to the house, and there was blood all over the front porch, all on the walls in the house, and every like a lot of stuff was broken, pictures and things like that. And it was because my mom and her boyfriend at the time had gotten into a fight, and he went into a rampage and just um, got violent. And um, in all honesty, some coworkers of my mom's found that out, and they went to my house. Thankfully, I wasn't there. And they jumped her boyfriend at the time, and that's where some of the blood came from. Um, so that was definitely not the proper way to handle things. Um, he did go to jail that night, and we also went to Women at the Well, and we was at that shelter for about a week and a half, I believe.
You and your mom.
Yes.
So, how do you know how old you were when that happened?
I was probably 16.
So, from 8 to 16, that may be the most traumatic example, but things like that between the physical abuse and the drug abuse were happening. I mean, how was that affecting you personally, and how was it affecting you like in school?
Even though I hated school, I definitely found it to be an outlet because that gave me time away from home. Um, as far as like academics, I definitely didn't apply myself. Um, I slept a lot in class. Um, as far as like affecting me in other ways, I almost became immune to it. Like, by no means was it normal, but it was my normal. I definitely felt that I was walking on eggshells. I mean, even starting at 8, like I was walking on eggshells around my mom until I was free from her, just because like one little thing and she would get mad, or I didn't want to like remind her that we had rent coming up or something like that. She definitely always said, um, like, she's the adult and I'm the kid and I don't need to worry about it, but she wasn't even worrying about it, so.
But you were aware that those things were happening even as a kid. Like you were very much stepping into that role where you were almost the surrogate adult, and you were. Doesn't matter if you were closer to 8 or closer to 17. You're aware that the rent is due that your mom is supposed to be keeping up with and paying.
Yes, I definitely was worrying about things that I shouldn't be worrying about at ages where kids should still be kids.
Did do you think that home life affected your social life and school?
Um, yes, probably to both. As far as my social life, I remember always like never wanting to invite anyone over because um, my mom's boyfriend drank all the time or was doing some type of drug, and I didn't really want anyone to know that that's what my home life was about. And school was definitely, I was very nonchalant about it. So I didn't really have any motivation.
Yeah. And I'm guessing then you didn't really have anybody you could talk with about it. I mean, it seems like you took the route of like internalizing it and just accepting that it was your reality. Did you have anybody to talk to about what was going on, or did anybody attempt to reach out to you on it?
When I started staying with my friend at the time, I became really close with her family and her mother, and her mother was definitely became a mother figure in my life, and I often talked to her, and she was empathetic towards it, and she actually listened. Um, and besides really my friend and her family, I didn't really talk to anyone about it.
But you did, you kind of created this veil around everybody else that it was okay, essentially, that, like you said, you were kind of nonchalant about it.
Yes, I think I was just embarrassed for the most part. Because I knew, like, whether I talked to people about it, I feel like nothing really would have changed because several times the cops would get called to our house, and maybe a few times her boyfriend at the time would um, go to jail for a night, but nothing really changed. So, and also, my mom never created a safe space for me to vent, and it's almost funny because all the time she would say that I look depressed or I look sad. I'm like, why don't I just cheer up? But she would never ask why I looked sad, so there's definitely a difference.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, did you feel like if you talked to other, did you have a fear that if you talked to other people more openly about it, that you would be punished or you would get in trouble for that? I mean, was that kind of like the relationship?
Not, I don't think so, really. I personally just think that I just grew immune to it and it was just not okay with me, but I knew that I couldn't change it, so I just had to go through it.
Did anybody, when the cops were getting called and all that, did anybody ever try to take you away, get you to leave, give you an alternative?
No, besides the time that we went to the women's shelter, that's really the only time, at least for my mom, that she got help. As far as like getting a restraining order and was kind of trying to get back on her feet. And um, the whole time she was at the women's shelter, she was still talking to the boyfriend that was the biggest reason why she was in the women's shelter. So it was all pretty pointless and just very disrespectful for the people that was trying to help her.
So, how did that turn out?
Um, After the women's shelter, she, her, and I moved into her boss's house where we lived with them a few times off and on, and that was really nice, but that only lasted for short spurts of time. And then when she just went back to her boyfriend over and over again.
Did she go back to the same boyfriend at that point? That was the reason you all went to the women's shelter?
Yes, from about 12 up until I was past 18, she had the same boyfriend.
Off and on.
Yes.
So, but later in your high school career, you did make the decision to leave and go live with your friend. I mean, how did things change when you did that?
I'd like to think it was my decision, and in a way it was, but I mean, of course, since I wasn't of age, mom had to agree for that. It definitely made things better, but as far as when I would go visit her on the weekends or whenever I was out of school and was there at the house, like it was just seemed even more dreadful to be there coming from my friends who had a nice life and was essentially a happy family.
So, you eventually made the decision to move in with them. I'm sure it seemed like a no-brainer. Did they offer that to you?
Yes, they did. At first, it just started with them driving me from school to the next county over where we was living, but of course that became too much, so the idea of just staying with them during the weekdays was brought up, and so thankfully that opportunity came.
Yeah, so I'm guessing you didn't have a car when you were in high school.
No, and my mom um, didn't have a car. Um, well, I should say she stopped having a car around the time I was 13 or 14.
Why was that?
She was, um, you might have to cut this because I got tangled, but her license was suspended. And I think, I'm not exactly sure what happened to the car. Maybe she wrecked it or something and couldn't get it repaired. I'm not quite sure.
Gotcha. So, you're living with your friend. You've found the opportunity to remove yourself from that environment, even though it's still not normal. And eventually you make the decision to go into the military. What made you make that decision?
I had always considered joining the military, and it was probably a semester and a half before graduation, and a bunch of my friends were joining, and they just suggested that I should, and so I looked into it, and while I looked into it, I just went on to the Marines website and asked for an information packet. Um, and I just kind of knew that college really didn't seem like it was for me at the time, and I wasn't even exactly sure how I was going to pay for it, though. Like I know I could have gotten scholarships, I just didn't know what help to seek with that. And I definitely knew that I wouldn't be supported by my mom or really anyone. So I joined the Marines.
And you joined the Marines when you were how old?
I was 18.
So right out of high school, you started your service.
Yes.
Do you, at the time, did you look at that as a positive experience?
At the time, yes, and to this day, it's still a positive experience. A for sure learning experience. And now I can say that part of me was probably using that as a running away method because I know like that's for sure going to get me out of this little town and away from my family. And um, I just kind of looked at it like the golden ticket.
And did it give you what you were looking for during your time there?
Yes and no. It did put some distance between the little small town of Athens and away from all the hurt and trauma that I had experienced, but I also was just 18, and looking back, I definitely didn't know what I wanted. So, um, yeah, I think it's both hands.
Good Steve Brown quote there.
Yeah.
Did you miss your family? You know, when you decided to enlist and you got there and you had all this, did you kind of realize that you missed them more than you thought you would?
I think in a way I was homesick just for the familiarity of it. Um, Maybe just even like the landscape. I missed some of my family, but I wasn't really close to a lot of them, so it wasn't a present and constant yearning to see them. And I was very busy, so I didn't feel like I had the time to do so. So essentially, probably not.
Can you walk us through how your military your experience in the Marines um, came to a close?
Um, so it came to a close with a training exercise I was doing where um, I landed on my leg wrong, and that's when I tore my ACL and MCL. And I opted out of surgery at the time because I feel like surgery would have been a definite discharge, but uh, I was discharged either way. After I was injured, I had to be put on a medical evaluation board where the VA gives you a rating, and so I received a rating of 60% and was honorably discharged. So I was in for 13 months, and my time was all served at Paris Island.
How did that make you feel when you had to be medically discharged?
At the time, it was definitely a slap in the face. Um, I felt like a failure to myself, um, like a disappointment to my family, even though I feel like they didn't really care either way. Maybe not that they didn't care like that I was injured, but more so the fact that whatever I was doing with my life, like I mean, it's not really theirs to live, so they didn't have much say. But still being pretty young, I just felt like I needed to make them proud, and so that was definitely something I struggled with, and it was very difficult to transition back from being in the military and then coming home and having to adjust to civilian life again. So I definitely struggled with that.
What made that hard, that adjustment?
I think I had just grown used to my life in the Marines and how it was going to be, and kind of having that some freedom stripped from you, and it just made it difficult because maybe for the first time I was like actually on my own and realized that I needed to figure it out by myself, and so just not really knowing what to do was the hardest part.
You mean when you got back, you were kind of in that position where you were on your own and had to figure it out?
Yes. When I was discharged, shortly after is when I started renting my first house alone.
So in the military, you had a certain level of structure, it seems like, that you hadn't necessarily had before. You kind of had a sense of purpose there. And it seems like you also had kind of like built it up as having something to prove to your family. And to lose that opportunity was almost like you then seeing them as looking down on you, even though they probably weren't. You kind of had that built up as, I'm going to prove to them and everybody else that I can do this. So then when you got discharged, you had lost that structure and that purpose, and you felt like everyone was looking down on you.
For the most part, yes.
And you came straight home and started renting a place?
I came home at the end of September and stayed with a friend of mine. I only stayed with them for a month, but yes, I started renting my little house on Knoxville Avenue in October of 2017.
Was that how did that feel to finally have your own place like that?
It was very, very nice, especially because I was the one that made the rules for myself. But um, I really liked being alone and just having my own space.
So you're living in your own place at Knoxville Avenue, and that is right around the time that we met. How would you describe yourself at the time that we met?
If I had to narrow it down to one word, I would definitely say lost. Um, at the time, I felt like I had it all together, and looking back, I clearly did not. Um, yeah, I definitely was lost in the sense of not really knowing what I want my future to look like, or not truly even knowing myself and what I liked and what I didn't like.
So you felt lost when we met. When we met, were you wanting to get into a relationship?
I think that I was more so fond of the idea of a relationship than the actual relationship. Um, if I dug deep enough, I would say that no, I didn't want to be in a relationship because um, I just didn't really want that independence taken from me, even though a true relationship, you shouldn't have your independence stripped from you. Um, so essentially, no. I didn't, but
But we have hindsight to look back and say a healthy relationship you shouldn't have your independence stripped from you, but you know, that's with all that you know now looking back. Do you think you were feeling that way at the time?
no. I think I was kind of just forming my independence, so maybe I felt like it wasn't a whole lot to lose.
Yeah. Well, it's worth telling everyone that Brianna and I have spent the past few years working through all the baggage and all the experiences that we had in our relationship. Feel free to disagree, Brianna, if you would like to, but I feel like we've gone through quite the journey, so I don't think that the listeners should feel like we're fleshing out our past relationship trauma here on this podcast. I think a lot of this is stuff we've talked about before.
No, I'm not trying to really paint either one of us in a bad light. Think that, I mean, looking back, I know that I wasn't wanting or personally ready for a relationship, but I did not know that at the time, so threw all caution to the wind.
Yeah, and I mean, I did too. I mean, on the topic of baggage, I came in with baggage that I didn't even realize that I had. I mean, I was off of a bachelor's degree and a master's degree in social work and working a full-time job. I was honestly, even though I was older than you, finding my independence for the first time too, because when I met you, I was still living at home. I'd always lived at home while I was going to school. And I don't think I realized how much baggage that I hadn't worked through that I was bringing in to our relationship too. And of course, that all got fleshed out over the next few years. I mean, do you think you could pinpoint the baggage that you kind of entered our relationship with?
Ooh, juicy. Dang, tough question.
This is some Jerry Springer shit right here, folks.
I think we should just skip to the fighting.
Yep. Out front, we had a ring set up. No boxing gloves.
As long as there's midgets.
Fun fact, I lost.
The baggage I brought, the biggest part is definitely the childhood trauma that I had yet to even touch the surface on, and a lot of anxiety that I didn't even realize that I had. And just not really knowing what I wanted out of life, I would say, would be the biggest parts of it. I would say that I was independent in most aspects, but as far as like having a strong voice for myself, that definitely wasn't there, and I think that might have been my biggest problem.
Do you think that's one of the things that was making you feel lost, is that you just didn't feel like you had the confidence and the control to make the things happen you wanted to make happen?
I think from growing up, like everything that I thought I might want just seemed so far out of reach. So, like, I figured why even try, because it's probably just going to be a disappointment. And it was a very pessimistic way to look at things. But as far as just feeling lost, it was really more so of just not knowing what I wanted to do with my life. Because I think I put most of my eggs in the basket as far as with the military. Like, I had planned that to be at least 4 years, and then 4 more after that, and then on until I would hopefully be able to retire. And once that didn't work out, I just didn't really know what I wanted to do.
So it was very much put you in a state of confusion, thinking you had it figured out, and then having that ripped out from under you, completely out of your control, and having no idea what you were supposed to do because you hadn't planned for it.
Definitely confusion and disappointment. So, and I know now that I beat myself up over that far too much.
Do you think that puts you in a dark place?
I would say the transition back home is the one that kind of placed me there, as far as like adjusting again from being in the military for over a year to coming back and like knowing how everything had changed, and I just felt kind of disconnected with those that I was close to in high school, and essentially probably living on my own made me feel isolated.
Yeah, it seems like you felt alone.
Oh, I felt alone.
Was a relationship the solution to that, or did it just make you feel trapped?
So getting into a relationship, I didn't go into it because I felt alone. Like, cause I don't know, I could be around my friends, or I could have people over to my house, and I wasn't alone then. So I don't think I was looking towards it to aid the wounds of loneliness. And I personally didn't feel trapped until our relationship got more serious, which I feel like it did get serious pretty early on. So,
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, I've thought a lot about the fact that, like we talked about baggage, I came into our relationship with a lot of my own baggage, or I think both baggage and expectations, because I had this stuff I hadn't worked through yet of needing to be both in control and needing to be this savior figure. And I mean, it took me well after our relationship to realize and face that, and I can thank Dr. Brown for it as well. But, because of all the things I had experienced as a child, not that they're anything comparable to your reality, but they are my reality. And, I had this sense that I needed to be the quote unquote man of the house, or the father figure, or the person in control that could help everyone. And when we met, it at least came off to me that you were in a dark place. And, I had experienced some stuff like that before. I had experienced people wanting to harm themselves and stuff, and I brought that trauma in with me. That was a traumatic thing for me that I hadn't worked through. So anytime that was hinted at, I think I snapped into this, I have to be there, I have to save you, whatever. I mean, I've often wondered if I hadn't brought that energy into our relationship, would we have gone through as many of those experiences as we did? I'm curious what you think about that.
in all honesty, I feel like we might not have went through some of those because, as we both know, it was getting codependent.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like when you were trying to be a savior, I was also given into that. And like some of the things, like just trying to think about incidents that have happened, like if you weren't um, just trying to save me, then maybe that would have given me the room to figure it out. Maybe it would have caused more harm. I don't really know.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we were a match made in heaven for codependence. And for anybody that doesn't know what codependence is, I can create a table for you of mine and Brianna's past in our relationship and show you exactly how we became codependent. So I grew up with a lot of divorce in my family, with fluctuating and changing father figures, but more specifically with a dad that was not necessarily meeting my expectations. Now, my dad and I have a lot of disagreements now, but I do love him, and I'm going to preface that. But at the time, and especially when I was younger, and including when I met Brianna, I had these complexes of I want to be a better dad than my dad was. I want to be a better father. I want to be a better husband, because I still had not processed through all these shortcomings that I felt like my dad had made as an extremely young man when I was born and when I was growing up. I mean, I think he had me when he was 21. Brianna, you largely didn't have your dad in your life. Would you say that that's pretty accurate? And also didn't have any kind of father figure that stepped up because of your mom's changing relationships?
I can confirm.
So Grayson wants to essentially be a good dad, and Brianna has never really had a dad in her life. And that's not, I don't mean to say that in any kind of negative way, but that's just the reality of the schemas in our heads that we were basically functioning off of. And it was this train collision when we got together of Grayson is going to step up and fill that role and be the one that's in control, that you can rely on, that you can count on, that can tell you exactly what you need to do when you need to do it. And, correct me if I'm wrong, Brianna, and I don't want you to fill in any gaps, but the way I think of it is you having never had that and needing that, at least in that vulnerable state you were in when I met you, you started to rely on that and rely on the fact that you were hesitant to make your own decisions and to stand up, and I was very quick to step up and fill that role. And that is how two people become codependent on one another, as opposed to two independent people that are willing to support each other when they need it. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Now, let's not recreate the situation, though. Grayson doing all the talking and Brianna just agreeing. Now, people are going to be calling me out in the comments saying, motherfucker, you just did the same thing. So, if you want to expound upon that or give your side of it, please do.
Train collision, I'm a little hurt.
I don't think...
No, it wasn't all bad.
Exactly. That's what I was going to say.
Yeah, I'd hope so.
Yeah. We loved each other, and I still very much love you. In a different way. We're not romantically involved. But, that train collision was not the end of our relationship. And, our relationship has still not ended, but I guess I should say I don't feel like it was the end of our progress.
Did you feel that, like when we were breaking up, that it wasn't the end of our progress, or do you just feel that now?
I think that when we broke up, I thought it was going to be the end of our progress. But I was thankful when we started talking again on a more casual level and found that we actually could continue building our relationship outside of the pressures of being in a relationship, in a we could continue to build our casual relationship, I guess I should say. Maybe I should just say our friendship, and not be in the confines of a monogamous relationship. Because a healthy relationship, like you said, doesn't have all this pressure. But the way that both of us approached relationships and our relationship in general, it did have all this pressure. So if we had just became friends again and immediately got back into a relationship, we would have immediately felt all that pressure again, I think.
Yeah, just the word relationships definitely puts pressure on things, and it was nice to strip away that and just be able to freely talk with you. And I truly feel like I wasn't able to do that when we were dating, so it was very refreshing when I finally found the freedom to do so.
Yeah, and I didn't either. And it's almost sickening how codependent you can become, because I mean, the way I see it is you saw me as almost an authority figure that you couldn't openly talk to, almost in the same way that you couldn't talk to your mom. I was filling that role, and you didn't feel like you could be honest and open with me. And I was constantly putting all this imaginary pressure on myself to be this person for you, that I didn't feel like I could discuss my own vulnerabilities with you. So, I mean, I think all that goes without saying that it was a lot of my own complex stuff that I needed to work through. Just as much as it was anything else, for sure. And, I think a lot about what things would have looked like if we had both gotten counseling before we ever got into a relationship. Hell, we may have made the decision not to, and at least to have stayed friends for a while longer. But, I did get some counseling earlier than you did. And I remember, but we had separated, and I ended up getting counseling later on after we had separated. And I remember, recommending it to you then, and I had recommended it to you before, and it wasn't something that you really wanted to consider. What was your outlook on counseling at that time?
It's funny how things change, but my outlook on counseling was definitely very southern state of mind, as far as like talking about my problems isn't really gonna fix them or change them, and I just didn't see how that could possibly work at all. So I just didn't really believe in it, I think.
And what was finally the tipping point? I mean, did you just get overwhelmed and decide that maybe it was, or was it seeing me do it? I mean, what got you to that point of, okay, I'm going to try this?
Well, essentially the first time I went for counseling was when I went into a panic attack that I couldn't pull myself out of, and I'm sure you remember. And after that, I was pretty much voluntold to seek help and someone hold me accountable. And so I was going to counseling in Cleveland, and I had went there for a while, and I remember trying one other person, but neither of them really sat well with me, and we just didn't click. So finding Dr. Brown, that was in late 2019, after sexual trauma had happened and I was reaching a very big breaking point. And so I made a call and was put on the list, and a month later I went to my first session with Dr. Brown.
Were you nervous the first time you went?
I was very skeptical, even though I had been to counseling prior to that. I still just didn't really understand how this would help. But the first day was a pretty hard topic, and I was actually very thankful for that looking back, because it just kind of broke the ice, and I just realized that this is what it is, and this is what I'm here for, and I need to talk about all of this.
So did you come out on that first day with a different outlook, or did it take a while for your outlook on it to change?
I would say it definitely took several more sessions for it to make a not really a visible, but visible to me change. Yeah, well, I'd say probably several sessions, honestly, because I still remember I started going to counseling at the beginning of December, and I still recall not being in a very good place when January or really even February rolled around. So it was a slow process, but eventually, once I got into the swing of it, I realized how much it was helping.
So what's your outlook on it now?
10 out of 10 recommend. I think everyone should try it at least once in their life. I feel like everybody needs therapy.
Well, that kind of gets into my next thought. I mean, you obviously believe that it helped you. What would you say to others that know they need help but are skeptical or just don't know how to seek counseling?
I would say that if you personally don't know how to seek counseling nowadays, there's so many apps and online doctors and 1-800 numbers that you could call, and that definitely makes things a little less personal, and obviously that wouldn't be physical, but I think the best thing to do is to start somewhere rather than not at all. a few of my friends are kind of in that situation. Like, they want to seek help, but they don't know how, or they don't know where to go to. And I've recommended them to places, but like, it took me 3 tries to find a therapist, and thankfully, third time is the charm. But um, I think it's kind of just a window shopping thing to find a therapist that really clicks with you. And um, as far as knowing you have help, vulnerability is probably the best thing that you can do. And I personally know that that is very, very difficult, especially when you just want to be painted as someone who is strong and never goes through any trials or tribulations. Um, but the first step is definitely to admit that you need help, or you need someone to talk to. And as the cliche quote goes, it's okay not to be okay.
So you would say that the window shopping and learning how to be vulnerable and the process it takes to build up a relationship with your counselor and see if they're the right one, all of that is definitely worth the payoff, you would say?
Definitely. And hope I'm not building it up all rainbows and sunshine. Like, it was definitely a struggle, especially comparing Dr. Brown to the first therapist I went through. I'm like, wow, he was sent from the gods. Um, but I think it's just a hit or miss, and you're never going to know unless you truly try. But I definitely think that um, unless you were truly ready for a change, then maybe therapy isn't for you at the time. Though I feel like that's kind of sending out a bad message, but therapy definitely changed me, and I was willing and very ready for that change. And I feel like if I went into it thinking that, even though I was skeptical, I knew that this would help later on down the road. And um, it's definitely good to be open-minded about it, and patient. Patience is definitely a virtue with it.
Yeah, I agree that you have to be ready. And I mean, I will always advocate for the social work approach for seeking out a licensed clinical social worker, which is what Dr. Brown is um, at Westside Psychology in Knoxville. Shout out to him.
Shout out.
But the approach is, a clinical social worker is going to act as your guide to help you make the changes and to help you meet the goals that you set for yourself, and to help you realize that even if you don't think you have goals, that you do, and we can work through them, and to help you kind of realize the goals that you do have and understand how to achieve them. That's a very rough explanation, but it is all about you. It's not about them telling you what's best for you, them telling you what's wrong with you. It's about them helping you process the things that you think are downfalls to yourself, that you think, not that they think, and helping you understand how you can realize the goals that you personally have set for yourself, because it's about your perception of you and how working through that, or putting that to the side, or realizing that those things aren't true, can help you achieve your own goals that you have. And that's why I love the social work perspective so much. But like you said, it's not rainbows and butterflies. And you were talking about the difference between Dr. Brown and your previous counselor, and the fact that, he was sent from the gods. But again, that's not to say that it was all wonderful. I think that the best counselors know how to pace things, and they know when you are and you aren't ready to face certain topics. and that's all part of the process. But they're also not there just to sign you off and say, yeah, he or she's good to go. They're there in the weeds with you, listening to your feedback, observing your body language and your emotions and how you come into the session and how you leave the session, and determining if you're actually meeting your goals and feeling accomplished in yourself, and asking the question of if you are. And I think in that way, a good counselor can actually create a more challenging experience, which means that they're a good counselor, because counseling is hard and you have to be ready for that. Like you say, you have to be ready for that challenging experience, because you know better than anybody that when you step into counseling, you have to be open to digging up these things that you have buried and you have put out of your mind so that you can get through your day-to-day life. And in time, you have to at least be willing at some point to pull those back out and examine them, so that they're not creating that low hum inside you day in and day out and causing you to have these unintentional reactions to things that you don't even realize you're doing, and you don't even realize those things that you've buried are causing it. Counseling in time is going to bring those things back up and arguably make your life harder for a while. But if you have a good counselor, and if you come to the table willing to change and willing, not necessarily willing to change, but willing to make the improvements to yourself that you want to make, then it's going to give you a better outcome in the end, and you're going to feel more accomplished and more of a whole person, I think.
You just made an advertisement for therapy.
Gotta reckon. All right. Well, we've still got a lot to talk about. I want to look at your process of looking at opportunities to leave Athens, Tennessee, making that journey across the country with me, what that meant for you, making the decision to apply for the AmeriCorps NCCC program. And then I want us to talk about where you hope to go in the future. But I think for part one, we'll wrap it up there and look towards all of your current ongoings and your potential future ongoings in the next episode.
Sweet.
All right. Thank you for coming on and being my guest. And as always, thank you for your vulnerability and touching on these hard topics. I know it's not an easy thing to talk about it in private, but to put yourself out there to the extent that you did on mic and for a bit on camera, it's not easy. So thank you.
Hey, you're welcome. Sorry if I was terribly awkward. Actually, I'm not sorry. Cut that out.